These stories are first-hand accounts shared by Reddit users, detailing unsettling real-life encounters that left lasting impressions. Each narrative provides a chilling glimpse into moments of danger, survival, and eerie coincidences that might make you rethink your surroundings. Disclaimer: these accounts were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they are described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. Incredibly bizarre and creepy encounter at train station. While this was now almost 16 years ago, I still remember every single detail about this encounter quite vividly. It was so random and so distinctly bizarre that I will never forget just what happened. I'm sorry it's so long. Background: I'm 20 years old at the time, and after visiting friends in college for the weekend, found myself traveling home alone and taking a late train from Boston out to the suburbs where my car is parked. I'm running late and very concerned that I'm going to miss the last subway out of Boston, but thankfully the train I needed pulled up quickly. I remember being annoyed at myself for creating stress with such an unnecessarily close call, as I was definitely on either the very last or next to last train out of Boston. And while I have friends I could stay with if I missed the last train, I have to work in the morning, and my phone is completely dead. The ride is long and slow, and there is hardly a soul on the train after we leave the immediate Boston area, which isn't odd seeing how it's Sunday and after midnight. Halfway through the 45-minute ride I doze off and jerk awake at hearing the blaring Braintree announcement, which is my stop. In my foggy state I grab my bag and jump off the train, and the moment I realize I'm at the wrong stop, the doors close. Turns out, they were just announcing the train destination, not the train stop. As you can imagine, I'm feeling pretty lousy about this, watching the train plod off in the direction I needed to be going. I'm the only person to get off the train, and the station is unfamiliar and utterly deserted. Quickly I realize I'm in Quincy, 3 long stops away from my destination, and I'm feeling screwed. I really need there to be another train. I look around and realize I'm close to the end of a desolated and strikingly dark outdoor train platform. While the chances for there being another train so late is extremely slim, it's my only hope, and I begin to feel panicked, stupid, and vulnerable. After a minute or two of standing there dumbfounded and triple-checking that my phone was dead, I suddenly spotted a man standing alone under a light, a distance down the long and thin platform. A little ways further beyond him appears to be the only entrance/exit, unless there are some stairs going down into the terminal halfway down that I can't see. While the man makes me a little nervous, he's clearly facing the tracks, which gives me hope that one last train is on the way, thinking that maybe he just missed the one I got off. I decide to just quietly sit on the bench close by and choose to stay unnoticed and in the dark while I wait. The bench is partially enclosed, and when I sit down on it I'm basically obscured from the shoulders down by deep shadows and can still see in every direction but directly behind me. A quick glance around it though confirms I'm definitely alone down here. So on the dark bench I sit and wait and feel comfortably obscured. With my wearing dark clothes, and it being so dark on my end of the station, I have the opportunity to rather blatantly watch the man at the end of the platform. The well-lit man is tall, thin, not old, like 30s, light slightly shaggy hair, and dressed casually preppy. He's strange though, standing abnormally still, looking straight ahead in a weird way. Something is off, but he's minding his business and probably doesn't even know I'm here. And while I feel really uneasy, I do find some slight comfort in being certain that no one is down here with me and can openly watch the only other person from my dark, hidden bench. After watching for a few minutes, the man begins to rock a little, placing weight on one foot and then another. He then takes a few slow steps towards the edge of the platform, and I notice that he's using a white and red walking cane for the visually impaired, and tapping and feeling his way as he walks forward. Suddenly I'm very relieved, as this may explain his unusual posture. Just as I'm feeling more relaxed, the feeling vanishes. He's still walking towards the platform edge, and quickly I stiffen and sit up straight, looking intently. He makes it to the bright yellow, raised metal warning tread that is at the very edge of the platform, only a foot wide, and directly before an 8-foot drop onto electrified train tracks. He stops there, banging his cane against the edge, toes literally at the furthest point. I stand up and walk a few paces closer as he starts to sway again, but more dramatically. My mind begins to race. What's going on? Is this a suicide situation? He's in a lot of danger. I want to take action and try quickly to figure out the best way because this poor man needs help of some kind. I'm just trying to figure out how to approach him because I really don't want to startle him with his being so very close to the edge. In fact, he's the furthest you can go and his swaying has evolved to a kind of dance. Suddenly, after what seems like ages but is probably just a minute or two, he stops and begins to take slow steps backwards, until finally he returns to standing still and staring straight ahead, back under that spotlight. With my heart racing and mind spinning, I return to my dark bench, sit back down quietly, and try to process what's suddenly happening. I want to help this man, but I am overwhelmed by alarms in my brain. I keep watching and being as silent as possible. He stands calmly for a few minutes under the light, facing the tracks, and safely several paces away from the edge. I decided to get help. He just did something crazy, really unnerving, and really dangerous, and I don't know what his intentions are. I'm still sitting on my dark bench fighting off conflicting feelings and secretly watching him, when he suddenly turns his whole body to directly face me. Straight on facing me, exactly the angle to where I am sitting, and he's smiling. He's far away, but so well lit I can tell. He is absolutely smiling and looking suddenly right at me. I'm completely startled and my jaw drops. My mind is now racing like crazy. He knows I'm here? He must know I'm here, but if he knows I'm here, why is he facing me? He knows exactly where I'm sitting. What? Is he actually blind? But I'm sitting in the dark and not making a sound. He's smiling. I freeze solid dash. What happens next is so sudden that I remain basically frozen like a statue, sitting on the dark bench the entire time, not making even the slightest sound. Suddenly, still smiling, he turns and faces the train tracks, and again using his cane, walks right over to the very edge and begins his side-to-side swaying, except now it's even more dance-like. He then changes position, putting one foot right on the edge and one foot behind him and starts this exaggerated lunging motion, as one would jump in front of a train, nearly jumping off the platform, but catching himself before he does. He does this repeatedly. All the while, I'm just watching from a distance, basically in, horror and confusion. Suddenly he stops all this and turns. This time he doesn't face me, but faces in my general direction, my end of the tracks. Smiling still from what I can see. He slowly begins to walk down the platform towards me. He is walking right on the edge, directly on the warning track. The whole time I can hear the clack of the cane going side to side. He is so close to the edge that the cane is going into the darkness. He gets closer and closer and I can do absolutely nothing but stare. How could he be walking so close to the edge? Why is he coming down here? Closer and closer he gets and I can now see him better, still the big gaping grin on his face, empty and farcical like a game show host, and his eyes, they're slammed shut. They aren't gently closed, they are aggressively and exaggeratedly closed very, very tight. I know, though, that it's possible to peer a little bit while making this face. My mind is exploding, and I remain frozen solid. He is now so close, about 20 feet away. I am thinking that if I hang on just one more minute, maybe he'll walk right by me, and with him out of the way of the entrance, I can run and go get help. And maybe, just maybe, his smiling was just a coincidence. Maybe this whole time he has no idea I am even here. Maybe he really is blind. But greatly to my dismay, only about 15 feet before he reaches me, he stops and he turns and faces me, eyes still slammed shut, gaping smile. He is just now standing there on the edge of the platform facing me. His eyes are tightly shut, and he is facing right at me. This can't be possible, and I feel like I am in a surreal nightmare, and then suddenly, it gets much worse. He starts making this weird, high-pitched whimpering, moaning, feminine, soft laugh. He reaches for the zipper on his pants and unzips them while holding his cane. He pulls down his pants and underwear exposing his penis, and then, while still facing me, starts jumping up and down, all the while continuing to do that soft coy laugh. He then changes position and starts doing that jumping from foot to foot lunging motion like he's about to jump into the path of a train, except now his movement is compromised by his pulled-down pants. He continues this, smiling, eyes shut, penis flopping around this way and that, and making that simpering laugh. All the while I'm sitting there is some kind of mesmerized horror state. Suddenly I hear the train rattling loudly and approaching fast. In frozen horror, I'm both groveling in thanks to God and terrified that at the end of all of this true insanity, I am about to see someone commit suicide right in front of me, or accidentally get hit by the train. Right as the train reached the platform and started slowing down, he returned to simply swaying again and took a step back. Being the very last train of the night, every car seems to have some people on it. I knew immediately I was probably safe. The train stops and I sprint like hell down the platform a few cars distance down and jump on. I don't know if he gets on the train too or just stands there, but I definitely don't hear anyone yelling or anything, so I assume that he pulled up his pants either way. And so, once on the train, I sink into the seat, my mind thoroughly blown. My mind explodes in every single variation of the feeling that can basically be eloquently summed up as one giant what the fuck. Gratefully, at the end of all of that, I really do feel immediately safe and I'm not further subjected to worrying about him following me off the train, if he even got on, because there's always other people getting off at Braintree. It was all just, quite simply, so odd and bizarre that I felt like after all these years, sharing it. It's easily the closest thing to a nightmare I've ever experienced. It was so weird, scary, surreal, and happened so quickly that it was almost like I coasted cleanly by being scared and just settled into a kind of hypnosis and unable to move. I'm not trying to be dramatic about it, I just don't know how else to describe it. Honestly, when I got on that train, I was just sitting there a bit tweaked, wide-eyed, and really honestly laughing in my head at the sheer shock of it all. The immense feeling of relief I felt when I boarded the train quickly changed any feelings of horror to that of shock, disbelief, and gratitude. Story 2. Piggy Goin' PP. This is not a new story. This happened way back in 1980. I was 5 years old, and I was invited to a neighbor's birthday party. We lived in the quiet suburbs of Baltimore, Maryland. It was an idyllic town. Trees lined the streets, looking over the neighborhood like giant looming sentinels. It was early October. I remember this because the houses were decorated for Halloween. The boys' parents pulled out all of the stops to make their son's party one to remember. There was a slow-moving, sad-faced donkey that the smaller children were permitted to ride. I was not allowed to ride the donkey. I was a fat boy, even at age 5. I was also as loud as I was fat. It was my loud mouth that caused this pleasant afternoon of cake, ice cream, and piñatas to quickly unravel into a horrifying nightmare. Aside from the usual accoutrements at a 7-year-old's party, there was a clown. The clown walked around silently, prancing and smiling. He would laugh silently. He would do the old, "I got your nose" trick and pull coins out from behind our ears. He made balloon animals and attempted to ride a unicycle. The other kids laughed. I hated the clown. Everything about him made me uncomfortable. And because of this, my fat 5-year-old self decided it was a decent idea to give the clown a hard time. Birthday Boy announced aloud that it was time to head inside to see the special clown magic show. All the kids went into the living room and sat on the hardwood floor. I stood in the back. The clown proceeded with the magic show. He pulled a fake rabbit out of his hat and performed other hack tricks as I stood in the back of the room and jeered him. I would yell out how the tricks were done. The clown continued to silently smile, making no sound as he went about his magical presentation. His face said happiness, but his eyes screamed in rage at me. This went on for 15 minutes. The kids laughed as the clown fumbled through some crappy dime store magic tricks. I do not know if it was an act of mercy, but the birthday boy's parents shouted, "Piñata time!" And all the kids ran outside to smash a cardboard donkey stuffed with candy. After a few minutes outside, all of the fruit punch I drank throughout the day went out. I scurried back into the house in search of the toilet. The house was quiet, and the sun had shifted in the sky, leaving the kitchen and the adjoining hallway bathed in a murky early evening light. As I walked through the kitchen and into the hall, from a room in the hall, stepped the clown into the hallway. He stood there staring at me, staring at him. It seemed like one of those Wild West showdowns from the cowboy movies my dad used to watch on television. He lurched slowly toward me, his painted smile unwavering, but his eyes, bloodshot and filled with unbridled hatred. "Here, piggy piggy." I walked a few steps in reverse before spinning on my heels and trying to make it to the kitchen. I felt a large hand land on my shoulder. I spun around forcefully and fell to the floor. The clown stood above me for a moment before putting a giant clown shoe on my fat chest. I remember trying to squirm, and I remember wanting to scream and cry for help. But it never happened. He stood over me, pinning me to the floor before brandishing one of those old-style seltzer bottles. He proceeded to spray the crotch of my pants and in a sing-song voice, he cooed, "Piggy goin' pee-pee, piggy goin' pee-pee," until the contents of the bottle were drained. When he removed his foot from my chest, I lashed out with my feet, kicking at his shins and trying to scurry away at the same time. I ran into a pantry and slammed the door. It was really a terrible hiding place. He had to see where I went. The pantry was about 4 feet away from where I was laying on the floor just moments ago. It was dark in the pantry and smelled of Pine Sol cleaning solvent. There was no lock on the inside to protect me from the clown. In the dark pantry, I slid to the floor and tried not to sob uncontrollably. Minutes passed. Those minutes felt like hours. I heard no sound other than my wheezing and a fear fart that squeaked out. "Oh, piggy piggy, did you make poopy in the pantry?" The voice came from inside the dark pantry in which I was hiding. Or so I thought. I froze in fear. Not moving. Not breathing. I did not know where the clown was. If he was in the pantry with me, I needed to get out. If he was out there, I needed to stay in the pantry. I lowered my head to the floor and squinted through the gap between the bottom of the pantry door and the floor. There was not much to see. What little light bled through the bottom of the door was quickly blacked out, and a bloodshot eye stared back at me from the other side of the door. There was a low, guttural laugh, and a voice that either hissed, "Boo piggy," or "Poo piggy." I squeezed my eyes shut and started crying at a near hysterical level. The door swung open, and I screamed as loud as I could. Standing in the doorway was my dad. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked. "Clown," I screamed. He carried me out of the pantry and out of the house and back to the safety of our house. Story 3. Chased and stalked through the woods at night. Despite a few creepy instances as a child, there has only been one time in my adult life that I have truly felt primal fear. My apology if it's a little long, but trust one in being as concise as possible and need to explain the surroundings a little at first. I live in a village in the middle of the English countryside. To paint an accurate picture of its size, it has a population of 4,000, but feels more like 1,000 due to its spread-out nature and being surrounded on all sides by lots of fields, farms and woods that eventually connects onto a pretty famous forest. It's kinda in the middle of nowhere, and because of this has notoriously bad phone and internet connections. Having lived here all my life, I know the place like the back of my hand. I know where all the public footpaths through the woods/fields are, where they connect, which are shortcuts, where to cross deep streams, etc. I have gone on walks in this area throughout my childhood with parents and alone as an adult. Nothing bad had happened. I felt safe here. This story takes place last summer in July after I moved back home from university, had yet to get a job and smoked a lot of weed. A habit my parents despised and which I tried to keep hidden from them by going for evening walks, multiple pre-rolled joints hidden away in my hoodie pocket. As usual this day, they both got home at 5 p.m. We had dinner but chatted for a while longer than usual as my mum had had quite a hectic day and was telling me about it. Because of this, I ended up heading out for my walk an hour later than routine, around 7 p.m. But as it was summer, the sun was still shining, so, honestly, I didn't really notice that it would start getting dark while I was still out. The woodland closest to my house is less than 5 minutes away, and you enter through a gate into a farmer's field. You can see across the open area quite far until the first set of small woods obscures your view. That's where I was heading, as I knew this track takes under 2 hours and leads back onto the same path I was standing on now. More than enough time to smoke the 3 joints in my pocket and for the smell to leave my clothing, I had thought. This entire area is very popular for dog walkers, so it's not unusual to see other people while you are about, and as this is a village, everybody says hello to everybody. I lit my first joint and started walking. I'm just in my own world for a while until I was less than 100 feet before the entrance to the woods. An elderly man was coming out of them throwing a ball for his collie dog. I finished my joint and stubbed it out. As I got closer, I recognized it was John, who lived on the road next to mine and knew my grandpa. We stopped and said hello as I stroked his dog Max. While talking, I see another man coming out of the woods. No dog. Bright green jacket. Very tall and had a good 10 years on me age-wise. Me and John chat another minute and say goodbye. He warns me not to stay out here too long as it will start getting dark soon. True, the sky was bright pink and orange. The sun was indeed beginning to set. I hadn't really noticed. I continued on down the path towards the man. When we were nearly passing each other, I looked up to make brief eye contact, smile and say hello, like everyone here does, even if you don't recognize the person. My eyes instantly met his. He was already looking at me. His dark eyes locked on mine. He wasn't smiling. I didn't know him at all, but I knew something was wrong. It was in his eyes. I swallowed my politeness and looked at the ground as we passed. I had lived in my uni city the past couple years, so I knew a red flag when I saw one, and my country bumpkin manners evaporated. I quickened my pace a little and before entering the woods slyly looked back. The guy was still walking in the same direction following John. I felt relieved, laughed, cursed the weed for making me paranoid while lighting up another joint and started walking into the woods. It takes about 30 minutes to follow the path through the woods to the end. The pathway exit opened into another field that led to another set of woods. The sky was now violet, the dimming light having been obscured to me by the trees. I was already smoking my last joint and was near the entrance to the second set of woods when I felt it. Complete, crippling, absolute fear worked its way like electricity through every layer of flesh. I'd never felt anything like it before or since, but I knew what it was. I whipped around. Standing at the exit of the first set of woods was the man. I could still make out his green jacket in the fading light. He's fucking doubled back. And very quickly too. I had looked back several times while in those trees and he hadn't been there. For a second I froze, as did he. He knew I'd seen. To sprint the distance between us would take him about 5 minutes. He was obviously in good shape. I threw the spliff and fucking bolted into the woods. The only way I could go. I didn't dare look behind me. I sprinted for a couple minutes before taking a sharp left turn off the path into the trees. Hoping to throw him off a bit, but I couldn't see a fucking thing. The light was already darkening and the trees made it 100 times worse, especially as I was now in the thick of them. Their branches caught on my clothes like fingers, whipping and scratching my bare legs so bad I bled. I ran and ran, my lungs protesting in pain, hating me for smoking so much, while my heart was throwing itself against my rib cage trying to escape. I couldn't anymore. I threw myself on the ground behind a particularly thick trunk. My back against it, knees to my chest, hand thrown over my mouth to stifle my labored breathing, desperately trying to pump air into my lungs for the next sprint. I listened for the first time. A few seconds pass silently. Then I hear him. Heavy footfall snapping twigs behind me and about 20 feet to my left. I dare not look in case he sees me. I have my phone but know I have little chance of signal being where I was. And knew he'd either hear me talking or see the light from the display. I'm not ashamed to say at this point I start to cry. The tears fell silently down my cheeks. What the fuck? I hear a deep voice exclaim. Where are you? I know you're here. I saw you. I have to clasp both hands across my mouth to stop my scream escaping. I can hear him moving around. I panic and I find enough courage to slowly peek from behind the tree. He was about 10 feet behind me, less than 20 feet to the left, with his back to me. I moved back and my eyes searched the area around me. I pick up a pretty heavy rock. I carefully check on him again. His back is still turned but he's searching through the trees, hunched down lower to the ground now. I made a snap decision and with everything I had left I threw the rock behind me and to the right. It clattered through the branches of the trees and made one hell of a noise. I watched him immediately bolt in its direction. Laughing. He fucking laughed. I paused a little, hearing his footsteps get quieter until I thought I wouldn't be so visible to him if I moved and threw myself forward. I ran, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, but I was also aware that I was getting further and further away from home. I knew there had to be a stream somewhere close. If I found the stream, I can follow it as it borders the land and runs parallel to some of the footpaths. I ran and ran until the trees finally cleared and I can just make out another field through them on the other side. I thank God and push myself a little bit further till I'm out of the trees and the ground disappears from below my feet and I go head over shoulders down the stream embankment. I crash into the water below, my open mouth and lungs filling with muddy water. As I splutter it out, I feel both relieved to have found the stream and terrified he's heard me. My phone is now ruined. I slowly make my way downstream as quiet as possible, listening out for him the whole time as the stream borders the woods, looking up periodically just in case. After a while, maybe half an hour, I notice the trees begin to thin out and realize this is the edge of the woods where I would have been exiting and where the pathway connected to the original one I'd started on. If I ran, I could get home in less than 20 minutes. As quiet as I could, I dragged myself on my stomach back up the embankment army style, wanting to stay as low as possible. I peeked over the top. I could just make out the opening of the wood's exit path about 50 feet away. I sat and scanned the forest line for a couple minutes. My eyes are trying to make out movement despite it now being pitch black. Nothing. I couldn't hear anything either. I pushed myself up and sprinted as fast as I could across the field onto the pathway. I knew the gate I entered through was in the adjoining field. It really wasn't far. I was so happy. "You fucking bitch," came a screech from across the field. I swear my legs nearly gave out then and there. He had been waiting for me. I turned my head and saw him sprinting out of the woods at full pelt. I screamed and pushed myself further, tears coating my face. All I could do was run. I crossed into the main field now and I could see the moonlight shining off the metal gate. My house was just 5 minutes away after that. I have never focused on anything as much as that gate. He was faster than me and getting closer, screaming at me the whole time about how he was going to slit my throat. I ran and ran, pushing myself up and over the gate and ran up the road. I dared look as I made the turning for my road. He was still fucking following me. I raced up my driveway and threw myself through the door, running into the living room, crying and screaming hysterically, pointing behind me towards the door. My dad ran outside while my mum grabbed a hold of me as I collapsed shaking. As it turns out, my parents had already called the police. As I said, I was going out for an hour or so at 7 and it was now past 12 a.m. and I hadn't answered when they had called my now broken phone, very unlike me. We called the police again to explain. They came and I gave a full statement. Both my parents and the police were horrified. Nothing like this happens here. There hasn't been a reported rape or murder in the last 100 years. But one look at me and it was obvious I was telling the truth. I was covered head to toes in cuts and bruises, soaking wet and covered in mud and blood. I won't go into how this experience changed me, it's depressing, but I will say the thing that scares me the most is that they never even had a suspect. Despite him following me so closely, he was gone by the time my dad ran outside. That guy is still out there. And who knows what he is really capable of. Story 4. Hunted on the Pacific Crest Trail. This story ended up being much longer than I had originally anticipated, and I apologize for the long read. I will say that in all the years I've told this story, people usually respond, "That's the craziest thing I've ever heard." So, I hope you take the time to enjoy it. This story occurred in the summer of 2008. I grew up in Oregon and was acquainted with the outdoors at an early age. My favorite hobby came to be hiking, particularly in areas that are either very dangerous or isolated. The health benefits of hiking were secondary to the thrills of walking the edges of exposed cliffs, being in cougar and bear territory, and knowing that I was far from help. Into the Wild was released in the fall of 2007 and I immediately fell in love. Being a high school senior, I could barely go another week living in my parents' house. The movie spoke to my sense of adventure and inspired me to hike the California portion of the Pacific Crest Trail upon graduation. I made it from the Mexico border to Northern California without much incident. I saw rattlesnakes and black bears, experienced dehydration, but nothing happened that made me fear for my life. Somewhere in the Lassen National Forest in northeastern California, I walked around a bend in the trail only to be startled by two people sitting on a rock dressed in nearly all white. Their faces were dirty, their appearance disheveled, and the man had a long, unkempt beard. Both seemed to be in their 40s. They looked like the couple who kidnapped Elizabeth Smart. What struck me as odd about the encounter was encountering anybody at all. I frequently went days without seeing a single human being. Their white clothes could be explained away by the need to escape the California summer sun. Their scruffy appearance could be explained away by the fact that most thru-hikers abandon personal hygiene on the trail. After I said hello, they said nothing and simply watched me as I passed. Even that I didn't find odd. I chalked it up to them being foreign and not knowing what to say. I camped a few hundred yards off the trail that night as I always did. Following bare precautions, I hung the leftover food I had cooked that night from a tree approximately 5 feet off the ground. Packing up camp in the morning, I noticed the food wasn't there. I immediately thought a bear had entered my campsite, and so I began to look for paw prints. I didn't find paw prints, but I did find boot prints circling the campsite, 2 pairs of them. One of those prints led right up the rope from which the food was hanging. I thought of the couple I had passed earlier and everything clicked. I quickly packed up and left. My mind was racing the entire day, but I figured the couple was simply hungry. If they had nefarious intentions, they would have come for more than the food. Several days passed and my mind was at ease again. I had begun to circle my campsite with sticks to wake me in the event of an intruder, animal or otherwise. I awoke in my tent one night to the sound of those sticks crunching. I grabbed my hunting knife. I tried to relax by telling myself that in the middle of nowhere, the source of that noise is much more likely an animal than a person. Then I heard frantic whispering. It was impossible to tell which direction the voices were coming from. Being in the dark, surrounded by trees, 100 miles from the nearest city plays tricks on your senses. I debated yelling out claiming to have a gun, but instead decided to be silent and retain the benefit of surprise. I heard footsteps circling my tent and was ready to slash and whatever opened it. But just like that, it was over. No more footsteps, no more whispering. I lay frozen awake in my tent until sunrise and opened my tent to find nobody there. The only evidence something had actually happened were the boot prints, the same as before. Several more days passed and I was now in Shasta National Forest, probably 50 to 75 miles from where I first encountered the couple. The trail became more or less a goat trail. Being on the side of a mountain and above the tree line, I could see the trail winding for miles in front of and behind me. I stopped for water in the rare shade and noticed 2 hikers miles behind me. All I could see were 2 white dots moving along the mountainside. I immediately said out loud, "Fuck this, this trip is over." I pulled out my map and looked for the nearest town, which appeared to be Castella, located off I-5. The only problem was that it was 25 miles away. I hiked well into the night trying to gain as much ground as possible. I kept losing the trail and decided to set up camp, this time far off the trail and into the forest. I got in my tent and tried to sleep, but every little noise kept me awake. After a few hours in my tent, I heard the telltale signs of another bad night. The footsteps, the whispering, the sticks breaking. Sound travels far in the absence of other sound. I knew they were close, but wasn't sure how close. All I could think was, this is fucked up, this is so fucked up. God damn it. Finally, a flashlight hits my tent, lights up the entire thing and goes dark. I unzipped my tent and climbed out carrying my knife, yelling nonsense into the dark. It was sort of like that cliché scene in movies where people in the wilderness hear sticks breaking around them and the camera pans around the trees because the people have no idea which direction the sound is coming from. Then I heard footsteps running towards the tent and barely made out a figure moving in my peripheral vision. I turned and ran deep into the forest. I tripped several times and ran into several trees. After running for approximately 5 minutes, I tripped, rolled, and came to rest next to a downed tree. I got under the tree trunk and laid still. I saw the flashlight moving around in the distance. I laid under that tree for hours. I was certain they were gone, but I didn't move. Eventually birds started chirping and I knew sunrise would come soon. Once it did, I made my way back to the trail, abandoned my campsite, and walked the rest of the distance to Castella where the Pacific Crest Trail crosses I-5. I hitchhiked my way to the town of Mt. Shasta and spoke with the police and Forest Service. They put me up in a motel for the night, and my parents drove from Oregon to pick me up the next day. I followed up with the police and Forest Service months later, who told me there had been similar reports of items disappearing from campsites throughout the surrounding national forests. However, there had been no other reports of the terrorizing that I experienced. As far as I know, nothing ever came of the couple. Story 5. The Stranger in the Orchard. When I was young, from the ages of 2 to 10, I lived on a 7-acre ranch. There was a small house in the front of the property where we lived, a huge grass yard and cabinet shop behind it, and an orchard in the very back full of walnut trees. My father was a carpenter that always worked in the shop, and my mother was a school teacher that was almost always busy. Because of their jobs and the fact that they were new to parenting, as I got older they really didn't pay as much attention as they should to where I would wander off. I would spend my days roaming around the yard, playing in the dirt and running through the walnut trees. I obviously didn't question my lack of supervision, as it was fun to explore this huge plot of land, and I just thought I was being a normal kid. When I was about 7 years old, my father surprised me with a brand new, child-sized ATV. It wasn't one of the electric ones that you are probably picturing either. It was a damn fast, gas-powered, quad/four-wheeler. Now, at this point, a good amount of you are probably questioning why someone would give a gas-powered ATV to a 7-year-old child, but like I said, my parents were a bit reckless and my dad, just wanted me to have fun. Pretty much right after I got the thing, I learned how to ride it by myself and started going farther into and past the property than I ever had before. I now had a free ride to basically as far as my young self would let me go before turning back. I started riding through the orchards, behind my house almost every day, and I loved it more than I had loved anything before. I would leave my house and be gone for hours. After a while, I gradually started roaming farther and farther away from my house as I became more brazen and a little older. I would ride down this dirt path that led past what I assumed was our neighbor's land and to a ditch that held water. At the time, I just liked looking at the water as it flowed, and I felt like I was a little explorer. I honestly never contemplated that what I was doing could be the least bit dangerous, and I really don't think my parents knew how far I was riding. When I think back on it now, just the idea of riding a pretty dangerous piece of equipment, far away from my house, without my parents knowing where I was, and before cell phones existed is pretty scary in itself, as I could have crashed or hit my head, and no one would have been able to find me. However, luckily this never happened and is not what this story is about. So, one day, like every other day, I was riding far away from home and I passed by a man wearing a dirty white shirt, denim jeans, and a wicker farmer's hat. I remember it vividly as it was the first person I had seen in all the time I had been out there. I remember the surprised look in his eyes as he stared at me while I rode past him. I had no reason to stop, and my parents had always taught me about stranger danger, so I kept going and forgot about it. On the way back home, a couple hours later, I was coming up to the same spot and it dawned on me that this is where I had seen the man. I looked ahead, not expecting him to be there. As I said, it had been hours, yet as the trees parted there he was. I really didn't think it was too weird because I figured that he was either a farmer or a homebody, so I kept driving closer to where he was. He seemed friendly, to be honest. He had a big smile on his face like he was happy to see me. To my 10-year-old self, I just thought he was a friendly guy, so I waved at him as I passed by and he waved back. I continued on my way and drove home, not thinking much about it. I don't really remember how much time had passed between then and the next time I went riding, but it couldn't have been more than a couple days. Like usual, I took the same dirt road and passed the same few orchards to the same ditch full of water. I didn't think much about my previous encounter, so I hadn't been thinking about the stranger with the big smile. I was sitting on the edge of the ditch when I heard footsteps in the dirt coming up from behind me. Again, I remember this vividly because it was not a common occurrence to see anyone on this trail. I remember being more curious than scared and turned around to see the same stranger with a smile. This time his smile seemed to be more of a toothy grin. He called out to me as he walked up, asking what my name was in a heavy southern drawl. I told him with confidence that I wasn't really allowed to talk to strangers, to which he said, "That's a good idea. Although you really shouldn't be out here all by yourself. It can be dangerous for a kid your age. I remember this striking me in the gut with a little bit of a butterfly feeling. I wasn't afraid, but I felt uneasy. This piqued my curiosity, however, as I wondered what he meant, so I asked him. He continued to walk closer to me slowly and answered, "I heard they found a little boy out here, just around your age. I think it was that ditch right there where he drowned." I would like to point out here that although my parents were reckless, they were not stupid. If there had been a drowning near our house that was reported or there had been a story in the paper, they definitely wouldn't have let me out anymore. "Anyways," he continued, "why don't you come with me and I'll take you back to your parents? It's not safe out here for a kid your age." It's okay, I have my quad right there, I'll just ride back." I pointed over to the side of him where my quad was, but he didn't look. His eyes remained fixed on me. They were deep brown, almost black and piercing into me. At this point I was scared and I knew that this could be a bad situation. I was hoping that he was just a concerned old man, but there was no way I was going with him anywhere. I got to my feet to start walking to my quad, to which the man said, "Should a kid your age be riding something that dangerous? Let's just put it in my truck and I'll give you a ride back." "I don't see a truck," I said, looking around, hoping to talk my way out of the situation. "Oh, it's right over there on my property, you can't see it from here," he said, his smile widening. "It's really okay, I'll just go now," I said, starting again to walk to my quad. But as I passed him, he reached and grabbed my arm. "You really shouldn't be out here," he said, staring me deep in the eyes. "It's not safe for little kids." "Let me go, you're hurting me," I shouted, starting to panic. But this only made him grip tighter. "Maybe you don't deserve to go back home. What kind of parents would let their kid out here all alone? Maybe you should come home with me and I'll take care of you." At this point I was about to pee my pants. I was freaking out and I started to scream. I don't know if I was saying anything, I just know I was screaming as loud as I ever had before. This only seemed to anger him, as his once toothy grin turned to a face of anger. He put his hand over my face and I took this opportunity to bite his finger as hard as I could. I still remember the taste of blood, so I know I hurt him pretty bad. Thankfully this caught him off guard as he finally let me go. I knew this was my one chance to get away from this weirdo, so I booked it to my quad as he winced in pain. "You little shit, get the F***ck over here," he cried in anger. I knew I didn't have much time, so I jumped on my quad and turned the key as fast as I could. It started up and just as I pulled the gas handle I felt a hand start to grab my neck. Luckily, he didn't have a grip yet as I was already starting to drive away. I punched it and noped the hell out of there. At this point all I could hear was the sound of my quad, so I wasn't sure if he was running after me. But I wasn't going to look as I could possibly crash and be SO. I drove down that dirt path as fast as the quad would go, probably the fastest I had ever driven it. When I got home I peeled out into the dirt and ran into the house hoping to God my mom was home. I burst into her room bawling and there she was. She asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't talk yet as I was so afraid. I just kept bawling. I think I cried for a good 30 minutes before I could summon up the strength to stop and tell her what happened. I remember the fear in her eyes as I described what happened. She pulled me close to her and hugged me as hard as she ever had. The next day I talked to a police officer and recounted the story of what transpired. I honestly don't remember much after this as I think I started to block it out. It's not really something a 10-year-old wants to think about. Needless to say, they never let me off the property again. My dad started drinking and we lost the house soon after this anyways, so I didn't have to live there much longer. Recently I was thinking about that day after I started trying to remember various parts of my childhood. My parents had never told me what happened after the cops were called and I had never really asked because I tried not to think about it. So yesterday I went to her house and asked her if they ever found the guy, considering he had to live pretty close to our property. She was kind of startled by the question because we hadn't talked about this in 15 years. She paused for a minute as if pondering whether to tell me and said, "We didn't have any neighbors out that way. It was all corporate-owned land and the description you gave didn't match any of the neighbors in the other direction. We called the cops and they went to search where you told us you were, but the guy was long gone by the time they got there. They looked around the property and found an abandoned house that hadn't been used in years since the land was purchased. When they looked inside they could tell that he had been staying there. Apparently he left his stuff behind. We never told you this because you were way too young, but one of the things they found was a black grocery bag. It had a roll of duct tape and a hunting knife inside. Thanks, Mom, but did I really need to know that? Story 6. Cult yard sale. I have always loved yard sales. In the summer when I have a free day, I'll often just drive around all day, looking for different yard sales, wasting my day away. About 2 years ago I was doing this, just driving around looking for yard sale signs, gradually going further out into the rural country and enjoying the scenery, having fun getting lost on the backcountry roads. You can sometimes find great yard sales doing this. I saw a yard sale sign off of the road, next to a big rock with something religious carved into it like churches have. I can't for the life of me remember what it said. God's Haven? Something religious, I can't remember. Anyways, I figure it's probably got some good stuff if it's a church organization, so I decide to go. I turn my new Jeep down the long, narrow gravel driveway and the trees open up to a clearing with a really beautiful white house. They have long tables spread out with folded clothes, kids' toys, etc., but nothing I was really interested in. There are probably 30 people milling about on the property, but they are all wearing these gray jumpsuits. The only other person that seemed to be browsing through their wares was this old man, whose truck was also parked there, but we were the only ones, save for gray jumpsuits. The woman at the makeshift table with the money box on it begins talking to me as I'm preparing to leave. I stride over to her for a friendly chat, and I notice that behind the house, there are probably 10 or so small, gray buildings that gray jumpsuits are going in and out of. After some casual chat, she notices me staring. Yes, we all live here. It's great. Hey, would you like to come in and learn more? She had this crazy light in her eyes, and I attempted to mumble an excuse when she nodded at 3 guys who had been arranging stuff on the tables, moving tables, etc., and they all came to stand around me. Really, come inside, we preach peace and the word of God, you'd really like it. She took my hand and kind of started tugging me towards the house. All the while these guys are following and I'm making weak protests. Then, the old man who's been browsing paperbacks seems to take notice and comes up. He looks at the woman and says, "Sorry ma'am, we both really gotta be going. I don't think she's interested." The woman looks shocked, but let's go, and the guys step back. He's a scrawny old guy, and I'm a petite woman, but that badass old man grabs my arm and hustles me over to my Jeep. As I'm thanking him and yelling back to the people to have good luck with their yard sale, he mutters in a low voice, "You really need to get out of here." My hands are shaking, all the gray jumpsuits are just turned and silently staring at us, and I'm fumbling with my keys. The old man stands by my rolled-down window and I fumble to start the car and try to back out of the narrow, gravel driveway. I tried to do a 3-point turn, but my car slid down in the gravel into a shallow ditch next to the driveway and I'm panicking. "Just take it easy, put it in 4-wheel drive," he coaxes. "I don't know how." I whisper frantically. I'd only had the Jeep for a couple months at that point, and I had never had a car with 4-wheel drive before. I figured I'd learn eventually. He calmly told me how to do it, and stood there guiding me as I finally got the Jeep to stop sinking into the gravel and drove the hell out of there. I yelled a thank you to him, and he nodded before getting into his truck. I told my family and a few friends, who kinda laughed and brushed it off, saying they hadn't heard of any cults in this area. Probably just a church sale at one of the members' houses. I've driven around that area a little bit after the event, but haven't seen the rock sign thing again. Though honestly, that day I drove pretty deep into rural country, had no idea what road or where I was. I just knew the general direction to drive in to get back to a main road and eventually find my way home. I think I may have escaped a cult that is kind of off the radar, but I swear to God it happened, and thank God that old man helped me get out of there. Story 7. Don't follow vultures. When I was younger, about 10 years ago, I got into bird watching. I was about 12, so it wasn't really official by any means. I was just some kid that liked to sneak up on birds, take pictures and look them up in books. I decided to start this hobby by making a list, with pictures I had printed from the library, of native birds in my region. Every weekend I'd wander around the neighborhood, which was suburbs smashed haltingly against large plots of land covered in brush, in search of new birds. With a few ponds and a large creek in the area, I found quite a few within my first few weeks. However, There was one bird I had set as my sort of white whale, due to its rarity in the area, the black vulture. We have tons of turkey vultures in my area. They are most common, but much fewer black vultures. They are a bit hard to tell the difference if they're flying too high. The best was to determine which vulture it is has to do with how much gray-white is on their wings. If they got closer, you can eventually make out the red head of turkey vulture, as I often did, disappointingly. Unfortunately, I cannot remember the exact date or what month it was even, I believe sometime in the fall, however. But one weekend I decided to spend the next 2 days searching high and low for the black vulture. I went climbing over the small wire fencing around a nearby brushy area, as per usual, keep out signs be damned, and searched. Usually you had the best luck finding scavenger birds on roadkill, beside the road, and there so happened to be a small 2-lane winder that mirrored the creek nearby, just through the foliage. So I cut across a sort of mini forest, headed in that direction. As much as it made me sad to see a dead deer, or possum, it was a common sight on this road as both sides are open, with trees and undergrowth almost choking it. There are some parts of the road that almost become a sort of tunnel, due to the leaves intertwining above. It was incredibly easy for a deer or some other animal to jump out in front of a car, in the dark, with neither party realizing until it was too late. I didn't have much luck. There were a few crows on the smear of a squirrel, and I saw a few ducks swimming the creek beside me, but nothing big. It started getting late, but the sun was still up, and despite the dangers of walking down a forest road in the dark, I was determined to stay out as long as possible. I decided to reach a small park area at the end of the road, and then I'd make my way back. I went under a small tunnel of leaves, and came out the other side, and was delighted to see the familiar shape of a large bird in the sky, circling. It was just the right shape and size to be a vulture, but I had no hope of checking for the grayness of its feathers, as the sunlight was limited. Instead, I was stuck following it as it slowly began to sink lower. After about 10 or so minutes, it landed, and I carefully snuck forward, cautiously avoiding anything that could alert the bird of my presence. I sunk low to the ground, realizing that the bird had landed in a small clearing at the far end of a park. It was just a small, open field, slightly tilted down a hill, with the parking lot on the top. I had been there before as it was a fun spot for kids to roll down the hill because of how steep it was. I approached it from the bottom, excitement brimming when I heard several squawks and shrieks of other birds. Black vultures are more aggressive than turkeys, and I was hoping to catch a spat. I got to the edge of the clearing and pulled out my binoculars. Two things kind of hit me at once here. One, I found it odd that they were in the middle of the park, rather than closer to the road, where you'd assume they'd find roadkill. Though I reasoned things could die anywhere, even in the middle of a park. However, secondly, it smelled awful. The scent was rather light, but I've been known to have a really sensitive nose, and just this sharp, coppery scent, like when you pull rotten ground meat out of a bag. I had smelled roadkill before, and in the heat of the day, it smelled bad, but nothing like this. When I put my binoculars to my eyes, I expected a deer corpse and birds fighting. I never in a million years thought I would see a corpse of a completely different kind. The birds were there, and I remember the faint pang of excitement I still had, recognizing the proud head of a black vulture, before the image of it sitting on the chest of a naked woman sucked the life out of me. I was frozen and I could not look away. My throat tightened with vomit, and I could not look away. The birds had done surprisingly little to her body. She had what I think were cuts, but most of her was intact. What wasn't, the birds were at. Her eyes, lips, and genitals were red and shredded. If there was a big defining wound, I missed it between the gathering of birds and the fading light, but what I did see I can never forget. I haven't forgotten. I can pull up the image so clearly now, even after all this time. She was pale, almost blue in places, with blonde, crinkled hair. I sat there, stupidly, for who knows how long, as the sun sunk behind the trees. This was a time before cell phones were a common thing, and I had quite the hike back home. I realize now I was in shock, and I could only move when the sudden fear that whoever did this could be nearby hit me. I forced myself to slowly waddle backwards into the trees, not taking my eyes off the body. I didn't want to turn around, for some reason. I was so scared someone would be behind me. I thought if I just backed up forever, maybe nothing would happen. It was dusk. And suddenly, there was light. High beams from the top of the hill, a single pair. I heard the screech of tires as the car wheeled out, and listened to it veer off to the left and away, down the road, opposite in the direction I was headed. That was the last straw, and I ran the entire way back the second I could no longer hear it. I crashed through at least a mile of brush, and while I was smart enough to have had boots and thick jeans on, my arms were bare and bleeding by the time I stopped. I paused midway through the brush by my house, realizing that, embarrassingly, I had pissed myself in fear at some point, before nearly crawling my way through people's yards to get home, avoiding all passing cars. The horror didn't completely end there, as I was home alone until past midnight, as my mom worked late at a diner nearby. It's stupid and I regret it to this day, but no, I did not call the police instantly, nor my mom. I was stupidly afraid that if I did, my mom would get mad at me, I would never be allowed to go outside again, or worse, that they wouldn't believe me for some reason. I locked all the doors, double-checked, took a quick shower and locked myself in my room. I had fallen asleep, somehow, by the time my mom came home. I confronted her in the morning, at least, but by that time, when we made the call together, the body had already been found. They took my statement. We never got any calls back. I stopped birdwatching. I tried my best to find an article or news somewhere about this, but I failed in finding anything. It probably doesn't help that I can't remember the exact date. I have a lot of missing time from ages 12 to 14 for some reason, which I can't even begin to explain. There are very few things I remember so well, this being a big one. I have never shared this story with anyone outside my own family, but I thought it might fit here, and I apologize if not. It was sort of therapeutic, I think, writing this out after so long. I'm going to keep trying to find something to verify this, and I'll update ASAP if I can. Story 8. Bicycle Boy. Hello all. I'm a constant lurker over here, first time posting in Let's Not Meet. Here's the story of how I met the freaking mayor of Nopeville. Several years ago, I was in a bit of a financial pickle. I was 21 with shitty job history, a shitty job, and shitty credit. You know, like most 21-year-olds. My living situation went sideways, and I had temporarily moved back home with my folks. As anyone who has ever had to move back home as an adult will tell you, this was a terrible, horrible situation, and I was in a rush to get back out on my own, which is why when my best friend, similar position in life at the time, told me that an apartment had opened up at her shady-ass complex, I actually jumped at it. If you're from around here, then you'll know that every apartment complex in that town is kind of shadister, but for those of you not from here, this place is a shady non-town outside of another non-town, with more liquor stores than any other establishment, and several apartment complexes with no credit checks and same-day move-ins. A couple months went by, and while the cops did occasionally show up in our parking lot, and you had to watch your step for more than one broken bottle, it wasn't the worst place to live. I worked the night shift at a large retailer, shuffling around freight in the back, hating every minute of every shift. So one night, while I trudged up and down a ladder like a zombie at work, my cell phone fell out of my back pocket at the top of the ladder. I grabbed at it, obviously missing, and died a little as I saw it smack the ground and go black. No amount of restarting or shaking could fix it. The LCD was completely shot. Fucking fuck, I thought to myself, and decided this was a good enough reason to go home mid-shift. Remember that thing I said about shitty job history? Yeah, you can clearly see why. Driving home at 3 a.m. on some random weekday, night shifters know how weird it is keeping track of actual days of the week, I turned onto the dark back road that lead to my apartment building. I saw something faintly up ahead, in the road, and immediately think it's someone's dog. I pulled up slower, praying that I wasn't coming up on someone's dead pet, and saw that there was actually a teenage boy laying on the side of the road waving. There was a bike laying in the dirt next to him. Holy shit! The kid saw me and jumped up, weaving toward the driver's side of my car. Now, I may have made a lot of poor decisions at this point in my life, but thankfully I hadn't gone completely brain dead. I suddenly thought of all the warnings to young women about how serial killers and rapists would lure girls in by playing to their kind hearts. I locked the car doors, but cracked the driver's side window. Are you okay? What happened? Let me get some help. I got hit by a car. They fucking left me. I need help. The kid looked dazed and was scuffed up, but something about him also set my nerves on edge. I'm going to call for help, okay? I grabbed at my cell phone, and then remembered the damn thing was basically useless due to its ladder plunge. My cell phone is broken, but I live nearby here, okay? I will get help. I hoped he didn't think I was lying. But then I didn't care. The kid slammed his hand against my car. Just let me in. I need help now. I promise. I will get help and come back. Everything will be okay. I felt torn. I wasn't going to let this kid into my car, but at the same time, I couldn't blame him. If I was scared and hurt, I would probably be frantic too. The kid slammed his hand against the car again, and I started driving. I hadn't been exaggerating. It was a 30-second drive to my apartment. I didn't have a landline, and I didn't want to somehow lead this kid to my empty apartment with no way of calling for help. I saw my best friend's boyfriend's car parked in her spot, and immediately was thankful for the stroke of luck. I ran up the steps to her apartment and began banging on the door. Roy answered the door, probably expecting a crazy person, and was immediately even more alarmed to see me. What is going on? Why aren't you at work? I breathlessly explained that some kid had been hit by a car off the back road, but my cell wasn't working, and that I needed him to come back with me. Melanie, my best friend, emerged from her room, sleepy and equally confused. Roy immediately took charge, told us both to get into the car, and drove us back to the boy. The kid was still there, waving us down. Roy, a large man, Mel and myself all got out of the car. Help, I need help. I'm here to help. My friend saw you and came and got me, okay? Calm down. I got jumped by this gang, man. They beat me up and stole my backpack and rode off, the kid said frantically. I immediately became alarmed. That's not what he told me at all. I looked at Mel, my face clouding over. I thought you got hit by a car? Why did the gang jump you? What? Yeah, they beat me up and then someone hit me with a car. Plausible. I was still confused though. Roy also seemed wary of this change in the story. Listen, man, let me call an ambulance, okay? Can you tell me your name? The kid lost his shit. He screwed his face up and clenched his fists, hitting the side of his head. No, just let me in the car, man. Just take me to your house. Roy was done. That's not happening, kid. I'll call an ambulance and the police and I can wait with you till they get here, but we can't bring you back with us. The kid slapped the side of his head some more, and then in the most disturbing thing I've ever seen, grabbed fistfuls of his shaggy hair and began pulling it out of his scalp. That sound is still the most disgusting and alarming thing I've ever heard. Roy gave Mel and I get the fuck out face and we jumped back in the car. I'm calling the police, okay? I will tell them you've been hurt and you need an ambulance. Roy began dialing, and the kid began stomping around and screaming. Take me to your house, just let me get in the car, why won't you take me home? The kid stood in the street, blood trickling from where he'd torn up his scalp. Roy got back in the driver's seat, and spoke with the cops as the kid raged outside. He then came to the window, staring so intently at us that I felt like my skin had shriveled up and fallen off. He began kicking the tires and Roy, clearly fucking over it, drove off, the kid grabbing frantically at the back of the car. Roy drove past our turn, around Peters Creek twice to avoid leading the kid to the apartment complex, and then back down our road. The kid was gone. The bike, the kid, just gone. No idea where it took off to. Clumps of his hair were still in the road. We never saw the kid again. We searched the papers and internet to see if he'd been picked up, or if any other strange things had taken place that night, but nothing else ever showed up. What confuses me still about it all is why he would demand to come back with all three of us. One person could obviously be easily overtaken, but what the hell were his plans for all three of us? Story, mine. The woman singing at night. I posted my story as a response to an Ask Reddit thread, and was told I should post it here. So here it is. Growing up, I always wanted to go on a bike ride at night. Something about it seemed really cool to me. It wasn't until I was 13 that my mom finally let me. She told me to wear my helmet, have my phone, take a flashlight, and she set the parameters for where I was allowed to go. She gave me about 4 miles, which was a lot to me. So right after the sun set, I was off. I loved it. There were no people out walking their dogs, no kids running around, the temperature was perfect, etc. It was really fun, so fun that I ignored the limits my mom set. You see, where I was biking was all walking paths. It was one of those grassy areas between two neighborhoods. There's this long path that went at least 600 feet at a 25-degree angle. I was flying down this hill, having an absolute blast, and darted right through the parameters. My mom set these limits for a reason. Everything on the inside was close to houses and people. The outside, more specifically, the place where the path I was on led to, was barren. I rode along this path for 10 minutes before I could only see some of the lights of the houses on the inside of the limits. After 15 minutes of riding along this dirt path, I hear singing. It sounded about 30 to 40 feet in front of me. I stopped riding to hear it better. It was a woman's voice. She was singing Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. But she wasn't singing the words, just the melody of the vocals. Her voice was strange. You know how when you have phlegm in your throat, your voice gets scratchy? That's what her voice sounded like. I inched forward to try and see her. I got close enough to see the silhouette of hair bouncing up and down, like she was headbanging. I decided to get my flashlight out. I'm thinking that maybe this person is in need of help or something. Or maybe this is an insane person and the light will scare them away. So I take the flashlight out of my pocket, point it at her, and turn it on. The moment the light hit her, she stopped moving completely. She was facing away from me. She had disgusting hair that seemed to be sticking together in clumps. Some of her hair was ripped off too. She was wearing a very oversized, bright red hoodie. I was almost too scared to move. I think she was too. I conjured up as much bravery as I could and said, "Sorry," in a very oops, this the wrong room kind of way. She didn't respond. I turned off the flashlight and put it back in my pocket. Just as I was turning my bike around, she screams. She screams in an awful, awful high-pitched voice. I damn near shit myself as I throw myself back onto my bike. I hear her voice getting closer to me. I book it as fast as I can. I don't look behind me and I don't stop pedaling. Her screaming grew quieter and quieter until it dissolved into the howling of the wind. Story 10. Stalkers in the Canyon. About 4 years ago, I was a junior at a small college in LA County. Bordering my town was a large cavernous region known as Turnbull Canyon. It's the kind of place that has a healthy amount of creepy folklore surrounding it, with an area emphatically known as Hell's Gates, stories of cultic activity, gang killings, abandoned mental institutions, and the like. The kind of shit you hear about any place old enough to have a reputation. In reality, most of the stories were spurned from a tragedy that occurred years prior. A woman's body was found at the base of the canyon, and from then on the rest is history. Nevertheless, when a photographer friend asked me and another buddy to go out to the canyon in order to take some photos of the LA skyline, I had to oblige. The canyon was about a 30-minute drive from our campus, and we had been listening to the King of Limbs the entire drive, which proved to be the perfect ambience to get me feeling pretty anxious about our little excursion. I should also note that I'm a pretty anxious guy in general, so traveling out to a remote area preceded by its reputation for scary occurrences admittedly had me thinking twice about the decision. At the top of the canyon, there's a small residential area, a few ritzy houses, surrounded by trees and woods. In order to venture into the canyon itself, you have to follow a main trail with several smaller arteries that split off in other directions, but ultimately culminate, after a couple miles or so, at the base of a steep hill adorned with an old water tower overlooking the city. Anyhow, we parked our car at the top of the canyon road, divided up the camera gear, and made our way out to the trailhead, around 1 a.m. by this point. After walking the trail for about 5 minutes, Dave, the photographer, decided it was time to set up his first shot while Jeff, our other friend, and I kept watch. Eventually he got the shot he needed and we continued walking for another 5 or so minutes before Dave decided to set up his next shot. At this point the trailhead had disappeared behind us completely, and we were a little less than a quarter of the way to the water tower. While setting up the tripod, we noticed the faint glow of headlights off in the distance, which was strange because the trail isn't meant for cars, nor is it big enough for them to pass through. If I recall, it's only about 5 feet wide, with shrubbery on both sides. This was clearly a bit of a red flag for us as we were the only people out there, so we immediately packed up our things and ducked off into the brush, waiting for the car to pass on. Eventually, an old pickup truck idled to a stop about 50 yards from where we were hiding. The truck itself was old and rickety, sitting on a lifted chassis, the bed of which was missing entirely. Growing up in the country, I knew it as the type of truck typically owned by backwoods folk who lived in the boonies and preferred to be left to their own devices. We watched in agonizing anticipation as the truck just idled in place for several minutes before flooring it down one of the other trails, the roar of the engine echoing throughout the canyon. Clearly we were spooked at this point, the three of us speculating as to our next step. Jeff and I were reluctant to continue, while Dave assured us that it was probably nothing, perhaps just a guy off-roading, as he put it. So, with great reluctance, Jeff and I trudged on behind Dave toward the water tower to get his final shots. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the truck. I mean, I knew plenty of people in high school who would go off-roading for fun in the woods, but never on finicky canyon trails barely wide enough to hike on, let alone drive. It just didn't sit right with me. After walking without interference for about an hour, we finally made it out to the water tower, climbed the hill to the top, and took in the view of the city. Dave, once again, started setting up his equipment while Jeff and I stood on both sides of the water tower, keeping watch just in case the truck came back. Nothing. At this point it's around 3 a.m. Dave decides that he's got all the shots he needs, so we pack up our equipment and commit to heading back before it gets too late, seeing as how all of us have classes in just a few hours. Just as we're preparing to descend the hill, the truck comes roaring out of the canyon below us, back onto the trail, at which point the driver attempts to climb the hill, revving the engine loudly. Scared shitless, the three of us slid off the side of the hill into the brush, clinging to plants and rocks. As the truck finally made it atop the hill, slowly driving around the tower, we could see the glow of the headlights each time it circled above us. After waiting for nearly 10 minutes, while also trying not to make any noise, the truck eventually descended the hill, stopping in the middle of the trail not more than 100 yards away. We watched as a scruffy man, mid-50s, stepped out of the idling truck and into the glow of its headlights, moseying around while looking at the ground. He then knelt down, looking at something in the dirt, surveying the area intently. As he did so, it became increasingly apparent that he was tracking something, our footprints. This next part still chills me to the bone. As my friends and I huddled together watching in complete terror, another man wearing a long, dark parka emerged from the brush, right where we had been hiking, joining the other man at his side. Apparently he had been out there the entire time we were walking the trail, just watching us, following behind at a safe distance. The two of them talked for a long while, but we couldn't hear a word. They continued scanning the area, looking at our footprints, but eventually got in the truck and drove off down one of the forks in the trail. We sat in silence for a long time, waiting nearly 2 hours just to ensure the coast was clear, at which point we made like hell back to the car, down the canyon, and back to our campus. Just in time for class. Story 11. Shooting gallery. I was almost killed in the mountains. I used to work at a security company with a bunch of friends. We all got along well and most of us even hung out after work. The ones I didn't hang out with kept to themselves. There were 2 brothers that worked nights with me and they were their own group. They were new to the company and would have many conversations about their guns. Bill was the older brother and Luke was the younger. After hearing Luke and Bill talk about target shooting so much, I developed an interest. I don't own a single firearm, but my roommate owns several. I mentioned at work one night that I was going shooting in the morning with my roommate and I needed a good place to go. Well, the 2 brothers pointed out a spot on Google Earth for me and said it was great and they have shot up there once before. It was 45 minutes away and higher up in the mountains. I knew the spot precisely due to a single image posted to the coordinates on Google Earth with used shotgun shells covering the ground. I decided that was as good a spot as any and told my roommate, Don, where to drive us. We arrived the next morning at 10 a.m. and parked at the top of the hill. We saw our spot about 150 yards away in a clearing down in the valley and began hiking down. On a quick side note, I wear this very bright neon yellow hooded sweatshirt at work and during the winter. I am also a pretty large fella. Being big and brightly colored makes you very visible from very far away. I've seen hunters using bright colors to avoid accidentally getting shot by other hunters. I decided to wear my trademark bright hoodie on our little hike. We made it a quarter way down the hill and I saw a group of fellow target shooters at our desired spot. These were the only other people we had seen in 30 minutes. Our spot is taken. Lame, I said. The second I said lame, that's when the shit hits the fan. We are on the side of a mountain, walking down towards them, and the rounds start flying. This group was shooting at us. Don and I were targets for about 3 guns and we didn't have immediate cover. I see Don running across the mountain, strafing the shooters. I see what he was running for. It was a small plateau about 20 yards next to us. The sounds of bullets flying inches away from my ears is a sound I will never forget. Movies do not do the sound justice at all, not even close. I still get chills thinking about it now. The vibration and rotation of the bullets chilled my bones. It's not a sound I want to hear again. It made everything go slow-mo and very clear. My adrenaline was kicking in. We made it to cover and hit the dirt. We were pinned down, but we had cover now. I had to have heard at least 100 rounds pass just over the lip of the plateau. I heard a pistol, a rifle, and a shotgun. I know I did. The trees, boulders, and mountainside were being hammered round after round. If we sat up from our cover, we'd have been shot in the face. These people were shooting up a hill, towards a road. They had their backs to their paper targets. Thinking back on it, my father said I should have yelled down to them to let them know they were shooting at 2 people and to hold their fire. But the thing is, I think they knew they were shooting at us. How could they not? We weren't that far and the mountainside was almost bare. I didn't want to let them know they were close to hitting us. I should have shot back. We had the high ground. But I'm not a killer. We just waited and listened for their footsteps and wanted them to stay where they were. If we were killed, no one would find our bodies out there. 15 minutes went by and the gunfire didn't let up until it just ended. The mountain was quiet again. After 5 more minutes of silence, we checked down the hill. They were gone. We had our guns ready as we scanned the valley down below. Nothing. No more guys, no vehicles, just their garbage left behind. We decided this was a great time to get the hell out of the hills. We made it back to our car and back to our house faster than ever. When I went back to work the next shift, I told this story to everyone. I even thanked Bill for the sweet advice. He apologized for the bad locals and said that's crazy. Another coworker told me Bill and Luke went out shooting the same morning as I did, in the same area. I asked Bill immediately about it, asked him where he went shooting and what guns he brought to shoot. He pointed at the same damned Google Earth image as before. Luke, his friend, and Bill were using a Glock, a .22 rifle, and a 12-gauge shotgun. It was all coming together so quickly. I told him he was a psycho and he almost killed us. He denied shooting at us and even changed his mind about where they were shooting. He said he was actually 2 miles west because his GPS was inaccurate. I knew he was lying, but what could I do? I had no proof. He worked with me for another 2 years before I moved away and never heard from them again. I remember how emotionless he was when he denied shooting at me. He was like a robot. We never spoke of it after the first time. I haven't gone shooting since. Story 12. My mom left my dad when I was 9. I have 3 older sisters. My dad was an abusive alcoholic. He used to beat us all, especially my mom. He would twist hickory switches together and bake them in the oven before beating us with them. My mom finally got the courage to leave him. We stayed in a shelter for a while for abused women and their children. After my mom saved up enough money for us to move, we moved into a mobile home. On our first night in our new place, 2 of my sisters and I were watching TV. My mom was in the kitchen and my oldest sister was cleaning out the bathtub. My dad came through the front door and put his finger to his mouth, saying "T." We were very afraid of him, so we didn't say anything. He went into the kitchen and said, "Carrie." My mom turned around and he showed her a gun. She screamed and ran down the hall towards the back door. He told her if she didn't stop screaming, he would kill the kids too. My 2 sisters and I ran out the front to the neighbor's house. We told them what was happening and it dawned on us that our older sister wasn't there. She got there maybe a minute later. When she heard our dad's voice, she laid down in the tub. My dad shot my mom 5 times, killing her. My oldest sister said he went back up the hall calling our names. That's when she jumped up and ran out. I'm 38 now and he is still in prison. Story 13. The Bridge. I live in North Wales, UK. For anyone who has had the pleasure of visiting, it truly is a beautiful place to live, though, for an adolescent boy, it is certainly lacking in things to do. As a result, my friends and I would often find ourselves mindlessly exploring areas of countryside and coastline. Despite it being quite sparsely populated in comparison to the closest cities, there is a dual carriageway running right along the coast from Wales into England. Also, train tracks run alongside this road for most of its course, occasionally passing overhead via a small cement bridge. Anyway, there was one night a few years ago when about 4 of us randomly decided to try and explore the inside of one of these bridges, as one of the group had observed a manhole cover nearby which we believed to be the entrance. On closer inspection, we discovered that several tools would be required in order to gain entry. We returned with the necessary equipment and proceeded to unbolt the cover. This had to be done stealthily as the train track was right beside us, not close enough to be of any danger, but definitely a sufficiently small distance to cause panic for any train driver. And panic usually means police. It wasn't long before we had removed the heavy steel disc and had started descending the ladder down into the structure. Once we had all safely reached the bottom, we decided to progress to the other side. At this point, we are totally confined into the narrow space that leads into the main area. If you are confused as to what the hell this bridge is supposed to be, you probably should be, because it was rather peculiar. I mean, I would have never known there was even an inside had we not found the manhole. So, as we squeeze and crouch and at one point scrape along our bellies, to the other side of the structure there is a growing sense of claustrophobia between us. The distance from one end to the other is surprisingly long, but by the halfway point you can look down through narrow gaps onto the motorway below. This was actually pretty cool, which helped keep us calm, in a strange way. At this point, apart from the mild discomfort and confinement, we were still just a group of guys on an adventure. This was about to change dramatically. No more than a few meters beyond halfway, which we could tell due to the symmetry of the passageways through the bridge, one of us claimed they could see some object in the distance at the far end. Slightly hesitantly, we agreed to investigate. Bad move. I reached the end first, and let me tell you, I have never felt the same sense of dread before or since. In front of me was a single fold-away chair positioned facing a wall. On the wall was a partially torn page from a newspaper or a magazine showing a fully naked lady in an erotic position. The reason I don't just refer to it as porn is because something was different about it. I can't put my finger on it, but it seemed more sinister than sexy, if that makes any sense. More disturbingly, the eyes of the woman on display had been cut from the page. Removed with precision, not just hastily ripped off. The scene that lay before us had rendered us completely speechless, and an overpowering sense of panic could be felt collectively. That was when we found the condom. The horrendous, gut-wrenching, blood-drenched condom. Needless to say, we got the fuck out of there as fast as humanly possible, smashing our knees and shins against the sharp cement edges that lined the path to the ladder by which we had entered. Of course, we were all praying to God that the manhole hadn't been resealed, as it was impossible to tell until you reached the ladder itself. Thankfully, the exit route was clear, and we promptly dashed as far away as our legs could carry us. I'm sure this ending comes as a disappointment to some of you reading this, as we, luckily, never bumped into the twisted individual who sits in that chair, but I must stress how radically out of the norm this was given where I live. The reason I mentioned the population earlier was with purpose. There are easily enough people here to escape the realms of crazy country folk, yet nowhere near enough people to have someone clearly lose grip on society without somebody taking notice. For example, there was literally only one homeless man, who everyone in the area knew and grew fond of, eventually resulting in a mass gathering at his funeral when he passed away. I sometimes think, though not recently as I had more or less forgotten about that night entirely, about the person who climbs down into that bridge and navigates through the darkness to sit facing a wall, and do God knows what, that ends up with a condom full of blood. You honestly couldn't envision a more surreal situation. It has just come to my realization that what we unearthed that night has not once been uttered to another soul. As a naive teenager, it was the type of thing you just wanted to forget, but thinking about it, we probably should have let the police, or at least someone, know about what was down there, because it wasn't the doing of a healthy-minded individual. So, there you have it. Apologies for the length, I got a little carried away as it is my first L&M post and I wanted to make the reading experience as similar to reality as I could. Now I'm a few years older and hopefully a bit braver, I'm considering going down there again, accompanied of course, to see what fucked up shit might be waiting. This could well happen in the next couple days, and rest assured I will 100% post an update as I currently have no job, so time is plentiful. Story 14. Stalked in the Jungle. Years ago I traveled to the Central American country of Guatemala quite frequently. I owned a small import business and I would go to various local markets to select and purchase Maya artwork, ceramics and woodworks for shipment back to the States. After taking care of my business obligations, I would often stay another couple of weeks exploring the countryside and visiting the more remote locales. Guatemala is truly a beautiful country of active volcanoes, mountains, stunning vistas, vast rainforests, ancient Mayan ruins and old Spanish colonial towns. To add to this beautiful mix, a very high percentage of the population are Maya Indians that still maintain some of their rich and colorful cultural heritage. Unfortunately, it also has its share of extreme poverty, shady characters, and desperate situations. I have many fond memories of my times in Central America and one memory that was not so pleasant. On one trip, I believe it was December 1991, I decided to travel to the northern part of the country in a region that is named the Petén. It is a very remote area, covering over a third of the country with, until recently, a very small population. It's covered primarily in lowland subtropical rainforest and is filled with the remnants of the ancient Maya civilization. Tikal is one of the most famous ruins in the region, but there are literally thousands scattered throughout the forest. Many hundreds have not even been discovered under the thick forest canopy and thick undergrowth. To me, this area was and still is a magical and mysterious place, ripe for adventure and discovery. I decided on a hike that would take me to the ruins of El Mirador, near the southern Mexican border. It's one of the largest Mayan ruins and at the time was mostly unexplored. I found my way to the small village of Carmelita where I could hire a guide that knew the jungle trails and the mules that would carry our gear for the approximate 75-mile round trip. We got on our way. The hiking was steady and leisurely, taking in the pristine environment and prolific wildlife. It was the dry season but still very hot and humid. Late on the second day of our trek north, we came upon a small group of 6 disheveled, hard-looking men that had set up what appeared to be a very temporary encampment. My guide, Carlos, was obviously surprised to see these men, and the men seemed not very happy at our intrusion. This was not an expected encounter. The camp consisted of a few blue tarps and supplies along with their horses, and I might add a pretty good selection of various firearms. I had read previously that this area was known to rarely have, from time to time, a motley collection of various drug runners, human traffickers, illegal loggers and looters digging in the ruins for priceless Mayan artifacts to sell on the black market, so I was obviously concerned. Here I was miles and days from any settlement, a white gringo among a group of possible cutthroats and desperados. Carlos initiated a rapid flow of conversational Spanish that I could only partially understand. But the gist of the dialogue was that we wanted no trouble and that I was an important person, not that would cause trouble for them if I was to be harmed, kidnapped, robbed, etc. The tension was thick and the feeling was cold. The men were agitated and obviously sizing us up with cold eyes and sneers as several grabbed their rifles and machetes and told us in hostile terms to move on. We were only so happy to do so, but the day was late and it was already getting dark. We turned on our flashlights and continued on for several hours in the darkness. Carlos didn't know these men, had never seen them before, and he was very worried, upset. At the time my Spanish comprehension was not very good, but good enough to understand that our trip to the ancient ruins of El Mirador was over. He told me that these were bad people with bad intentions and he thought we were probably going to be followed. Maybe robbed of our provisions and his mules and possibly harmed. I can't begin to explain the terror of that night. Never have I been so scared. We got off the trail and moved maybe a mile deeper into the jungle, cut out a small clearing and set up our hammocks. Carlos took the mules deeper into the jungle so they could not be heard and possibly give away our position. No sleep that night. We sat up listening, whispering, taking small comfort in our companionship and shared terror. Every sound manifested into the sound of footsteps closing in on us in the complete darkness and stifling humidity. Carlos had an antique pistol that he cradled in his palm. Not much of a defense against a group of 6 men with automatic rifles and sharp machetes. We started moving again before dawn. Carlos said we would have to cut through the forest and stay off the trail until we got closer to his village of Carmelita. The hiking was intense and nerve-wracking, but at least we were moving toward safety. We didn't stop, we didn't eat, we moved continuously until we reached a small clearing and homestead. It was a family that he knew and we spent the night there. Carlos and his friend discussed the event throughout the night. They were speculating on who these men might be and the probability they might have followed us to the homestead. They both stayed vigilant while I curled up in my hammock, surrounded by his 4 curious children, completely exhausted from the forced march with frayed nerves and empty stomach. I couldn't eat because my stomach was in such knots. We never knew if they tried to follow us. But the next day we finally reached the safety of Carmelita and my first adventure in that part of the Petén came to a favorable ending. Story 15. Strangers straight up tried to drown me. This took place about 10 years ago when I was a freshman in college. This is the first time I've recounted this story, in full detail, to anyone. I attended college in a rural, mountain area in the Northeast. A small school tucked away in the rolling hills of the mountains. The type of place where the beauty and casual grace of nature is juxtaposed by the ugliness of humanity. The newspaper was ultra-conservative and you couldn't sojourn too deeply into the woods beyond a few trees without seeing some trace of meth activity. You know the type of place I mean. Anyway, one of my new friends from college somehow discovered an abandoned train trestle deep in the woods about 5 miles from campus, in no man's land, basically. I don't remember how he found this place, because it was very much off the beaten path. The trestle crossed above a river which placidly flowed about 40 feet below. It was actually quite beautiful and we began going there maybe 3 times a week just chilling on the trestle, watching the water below and the open sky above. We drink 40s there, smoke a bowl there, bring girls there. We began jumping off the trestle into the water below and then climbing back up. It was just a very college-y thing to do. Our chill spot basically. So one day, just needing to get away from the dorms and away from it all, I decided to go by myself to the trestle for a swim. It was about 7 p.m. so I still had a good hour or so of dim sunlight and I brought a flashlight for the walk home when it was sure to be dark. I made the trek through the pathways of the woods as I had done 100 times before, left my towel and flashlight on the trestle and jumped into the water. The water was about 10 to 15 feet deep, I'd say. It flowed almost imperceptibly. You might as well be swimming in a stagnant pool. However, about maybe 50 yards away from the trestle, the river narrows and the current picks up significantly, then about 20 yards after that there is a maybe 20-foot-high waterfall that bubbles and splashes with extreme violence. We used to watch large objects go over and never come up again. So there I am, dimly bobbing my head in and out of the water, doing underwater flips, etc. When I pop my head out of the water, I happen to glance to the side of the river and see a man walking towards the water. The water is kind of impeding my view, so I don't see him fluidly walking towards the water. I see him in different stages of being closer to the water. Like flipping through a flip book. He is 15 feet away, 10 feet away, 5 feet away. I can barely give you a description, maybe 6 foot tall, pale, skinny, black hair pulled back in a ponytail. What I do remember most about his appearance was the extremely empty look on his face and in his eyes. Like he was doing something mundane, taking out the trash or raking leaves. I'm treading water, not knowing what to think, and I see that he is no longer beside the river. He has dove in and is swimming pin straight directly at me so fast. So fast. I try to swim the opposite way, but within a minute I feel him grab my ankle and tug. I tried to scream, but water filled my mouth. While I'm underwater, he lets go and goes up for air, then grabs back on and pulls me again. It seems like he's done this before and I never once see him after he jumped in the water. He's gradually pulling me to where the current picks up before the waterfall. I start to realize this and just fucking flipping out. Kicking, screaming, cursing to no effect. Finally, I feel the current start to take me, and as I twist away towards the waterfall, I look back and see this fucking guy just casually swimming back to where he jumped in the water. Not even looking at me. This is by far the scariest moment of my life as I approach the waterfall. Long story short, I go over and am underwater for a long time, over a minute. The water above, unrelentingly pushing me under. The only reason I survived was there was a large log that had gone over and I grabbed it and leveraged it against the bottom to push me away from the crushing water. I survived obviously. But then I had to trek the miles back to my dorm, in the dark, without my flashlight. Every step of the way thinking he would come back to finish the job. The next year, a football player drowned going over that fall. The news said it was because there was an extreme current due to recent rainfall, but I've always wondered about that.